Need to breathe. Let's give it up for the chapel band. I love that Need to Breathe band. I love that song. And there is a line from that song that perfectly frames our thought for tonight. Come to the fountain and you can be satisfied. Last night, Jason Browning did a fantastic job laying a foundation for our last night of Convocation. He talked about the story of the woman at the well and the baggage and the shame that she carried. We'll take a deeper look at that story tonight and move forward with it. But it's a story about being thirsty. Now, we've all been really thirsty at points in our lives. The greatest thirst that I've ever experienced actually goes back to my high school football playing days. There's a picture up on the screen now of my two best friends and me, little old school, mullet heaven. We played the offensive line together. I'm in the middle, number 51, and on the left is number 64, my great friend John Wally Wildermuth. On the right is Gerald Toto Johnson. Now, his family was kind of cruel, and they gave him the nickname Toto because they said he looked like the dog named Toto on The Wizard of Oz when he was born. So Toto. Now, I'd like for you to imagine something with me real quickly. Put yourself in this mind frame. Imagine that it's mid-August, you're outside. It's near 100 degrees. It feels like the humidity is 150%. You have about 20 pounds of football equipment on, and you have two-day practices, and it's in the middle of the heat of the day after already showing up in the morning to lift a bunch of weights. You're trying to knock the snot out of each other, and you're punishing your own body. Now, add to that, we would weigh in every morning before football practice, before two-a-days, and then we'd have to weigh out after that whole ordeal throughout the entire day. There were some days that we lost 10 pounds in 6 hours. Bottom line, it was brutal. Now, my coaches, for those of you who have played athletics on any level, you may have had coaches like this, but my coaches were the kind of coaches who used water as a weapon. Play well, get a drink. You don't do well, they're happy to create something that closely resembles the lake of fire. Now, I can't tell you how many times I thought about just quitting. It ran through my mind consistently, particularly when I was so thirsty and it was so hot. And I must confess that there were times when I was running sprints while harboring homicidal fantasies toward my coaches. How many ways could I kill them with their own whistles? Now, it wasn't a question as to whether or not if I was going to kill them. It was only a question of the method. And to top it all off, the water supply was nasty. We didn't have water bottles. We didn't have cups of Gatorade. We didn't have all that kind of fancy stuff. Our practice field was actually on the edge of a farm. There was this crudely constructed contraption of some water pipes, and they had tied them together somehow, and it was hooked up to a garden hose. So when we wanted to go get a drink, when the coaches finally let us go get a drink, we'd go over and we'd turn the faucet on. The water would run through the water hose and it would come up through the pipes. And on the pipe that ran horizontally, they had drilled holes into the pipe. So when the water came on, it sprang up through the holes in the pipe. Now, regardless of how tired and thirsty we would hurry to that pipe and drink like that was the purest water. We didn't care how nasty the water was. It didn't matter who was drinking next to us. It could have been the star player. It could have been the biggest scrub on the beef squad. It didn't matter if the guy before us had actually put his mouth on that pipe. It didn't matter if we would get the scurvy. Why did these things not matter? Because we were desperately thirsty. Now, I would like to show you what this looks like. One of my favorite films of all time is Remember the Titans. You betcha. It captures the intensity and thirst that I'm trying to describe perfectly. And in this clip, one of the players, Blue Stanton, is tired and thirsty. He asks Coach Herman Boone, who's played by Denzel Washington, for a water break. So let's take a look at Remember the Titans.
What are y'all doing? 44 stacked. You're supposed to know your job. Campbell, you're playing selfish show-off football. Hold your man down.
Don't you single me out like that. What, you think I'm stupid or something?
Listen, I'm the team captain, and I don't need you up on my face all the team captain.
We gotta play football, y'all. Let's play football.
I got it. You all didn't come out here to practice, cause champions pay the price. Looking like a bunch of bums out here.
Let's go. Who's a coward? Cowards won't block. Cowards won't tackle. Cowards won't go after fumble.
Coach, we need a water break. We've been out here all day.
What did you say?
I said we need a water break.
You need a water break. Water is for cowards. Water makes you weak. Water is for washing blood off that uniform, and you don't get no blood on my uniform. Boy, you must be outside your mind. We are going to do up-downs until Blue is no longer tired and thirsty.
Coach.
There's a fine line between tough and crazy, and you're flirting with it.
Yeah, sure, give it up for Denzel. That's fine. Now, there's some really memorable lines in this clip. Water is for cowards. I can stand before you today and gladly admit that I was a coward. How about water makes you weak? I can also gladly confess that I was weak. Now, the one coach, there's a fine line between tough and crazy, and you're flirting with it. Now, I got one question in all sincerity. Where was that coach when I needed him most? But let's get back to the story. In full confession, though, I got to let you know, I never actually harmed my coaches, and I was finally able to forgive them just last week. But here's the key takeaway from this story for us. Even though that water pipe was nasty, we had to keep coming back to it because we kept getting thirsty. And regardless of how much we drank, the cycle of thirst and coming back to that water pipe never ended. So let's talk about the woman at the well. Jesus is going through Samaria when he gets to this town named Sychar. He was so tired of traveling that he sat down at this well at noon. And as he's sitting there, this Samaritan woman, and we know she's kind of sketchy, she comes to the well to get some water. He asks her to give him a drink. She responds with a bit of a surprise. She says, "You are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" Now, the Bible makes it abundantly clear that the Jews and the Samaritans don't mix with each other very well. So Jesus answers her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." Now, I want this story to come alive to us in a way that perhaps we typically don't understand it, particularly from the perspective of the woman. It's easy to just kind of read through the passage and to hear the passage without fully seeing things from her perspective. So I've asked Savannah Stone to put together a spoken word for us to more fully understand what's going on with this woman. Let's welcome to the stage Savannah Stone.
No, I never got used to the heat. There's a reason why people don't go out to the well at noon. It's blistering. It's almost painful to go, but I'd rather stick that pain into my routine than have to deal with the looks that I know that they'll give me. Because there's something about looks, they force you down lower than deserving words, lower than any shot at mercy, lower than any chance of defense, because apparently my sin is some contagious disease, and people thought if they were to dare to address me, they'd catch my form of leprosy. So I just got tired of the constant reminders of who I am to them, to myself, to the men. I just got so tired. So I kept running in these circles over and over. I'd drag myself, my jar, and my reputation out to the well. I'd fill everything up, just enough to have to go back again. I'd thirst and I'd hide and I'd thirst again, and I'd go back and I'd go back and I'd go back, and I kept running in circles until he showed up. He was the first person I'd seen out there in months. He was clearly a Jew, and I'm so obviously not, yet he had the audacity to ask me for a drink of water. If you only knew who he was asking, right? Why would you want water from a Samaritan, much less from a woman, much less from this woman with not one, not two, but 5 ex-husbands and a man on the side? Why would you want water from hands as dirty as mine? But he kept his eyes steady and looked right at me and said, if you only knew who I was and who you were, then you'd be the one asking me for water, and not just water like you've known it, but something living, something better. I asked him what he meant, and he said that he could spring up a well inside me. So I said that I'd take it, because I didn't want to be thirsty. I didn't want to keep running. I didn't want to get used to the heat. So I asked for his water, and he asked for my husband. But apparently he already knew all about them, and not just the one, but the 4 before him. So I braced myself to see what he'd do next. But for once, this person didn't run away, didn't get up and leave, didn't give me some look. He just kept offering water that would satisfy me. This total stranger saw me past my history. So I tried to fight what I was feeling, tried to doubt my way out of believing what I felt in my heart, but I couldn't help it. I just said, I heard a Messiah's coming. And he said 3 words that changed everything. He said, I am he. I'm not making it up. I who am nothing, I saw the Messiah, and he saw straight through me. I didn't drink any water, but I didn't leave thirsty, because he didn't just know what I did. He knew what I needed, and he's still at the well. So why are you waiting? He's the one we've been talking about, the one we've waited so long for. We don't have to live thirsty, ashamed, and unsatisfied anymore.
Good job. I think Savannah summed up this story beautifully. He's the one we've been talking about, the one we've been waiting for. We don't have to live thirsty and unsatisfied anymore. The woman was thirsty. She kept coming back to that well, ashamed and alone, to fill her water jar. The woman had 3 strikes against her. Strike one, she was a Samaritan. They were unclean. Strike two, she was talking with a man in a public place. And Jesus, a Jewish man, should not have been talking with her. In fact, some rabbis taught that talking with a woman in public could eventually lead a man to hell. 3, she had been married to 5 men, and she was shacking up with number 6. It was loose at best. One scholar called her a serial fornicator. By every count, she was too far gone, unreachable. She was too scarred. But Jesus breaks through all the ethnic, all the geographic, all the racial, all the gender barriers, and he risks being accused of trying to hook up with this woman by talking with her in public. By doing so, he intervenes in her cycle of shame and her routine to quench her thirst forever. And in John chapter 4, 13 through 14, Jesus gets to the point. Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman obviously doesn't get it. She says, "Sir, give me this water so I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming back here to draw water." What is she really saying? She wants to avoid coming back to the well, not because she's lazy, but because she's tired of the shame. But what does Jesus really mean by living water? Jesus is talking about the kind of water that flows and bubbles up as compared to stagnant water. The Greek word used here literally means that living water, catch this, it leaps, it jumps, it gushes. It's like he's saying that she's been trying to live by drinking by a puddle, but he's offering her the power and life like something akin to the Ocoee River. Jesus is offering this woman the kind of water that will quench forever a different kind of thirst. And after they get deeper into the conversation, we run into an amazing aspect of this story that we just run by all the time. And it's absolutely incredible if we can grasp it and if we can apply it to our lives. In the midst of coming to the well to quench your thirst, catch what we read in John 4:28 through 30. Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" They came out of the town and made their way toward him. I think we missed the gravity of this picture. The woman had been touched on such a deep level that she left her water jar. Her deeper thirst had been quenched so overwhelmingly that her momentary thirst didn't matter anymore. The jar represented her social humiliation. The jar reminded her that she was trash. She leaves it behind because she is now experiencing a leaping, jumping Ocoee River inside of her. Her deep thirst was so satisfied that the water jar didn't matter to her anymore. She doesn't have to come back to that well anymore the way that she used to. But it's time to take this a little more deeply and time to make it a bit more personal. I have a question for us tonight. What do we keep putting in our jars that might quench our thirst for a moment, but doesn't satisfy what we really thirst for? We're just like the woman at the well. In so many ways, I am that woman. We keep coming back to the same wells to satisfy our thirst, but we need to address our true thirst. Many of us keep coming back to the same wells in ways that perpetuate our shame and keep us from experiencing true community. I got to be honest with you tonight. I have tried to fill my jar with so many things that can't quench my deeper thirst. I feel compelled to share some of these things with you in hopes of encouraging you to leave your jars behind as well. And just for context, all of these things began while I was in high school or as a student at Lee College. Now, before I get into these things, I want to make it clear. I want to be sure that you know that I'm not trying to condemn anyone. I'm simply sharing 5 ways that I have tried to fill my water jar in my struggles throughout my life. What have I put in my jar? I've tried to fill my jar with my shirts. Now, before you think that I'm going to jump on the Greek community and denounce that there's some kind of scourge on our campus, you might want to hang on for just a minute. This is not a referendum on the Greek system whatsoever, and to the contrary, this is part of my story, and it's pretty positive. I was fortunate to get into Chi my freshman year. It was a deeply meaningful experience for me as a student, and it has been since. The motto for Alpha, Truth, Gamma, Knowledge, Chi, Christ is the Christian gentleman and the Christian scholar to the greater glory of God. I try to live up to that motto every day. During my freshman year, Dr. Harper and I were fortunate enough to be part of 20 guys who played 100 hours of softball in a marathon to raise thousands of dollars to benefit March of Dimes for birth defects. And I learned so much about service and leadership in my time in Chi. But here's where I struggled. I allowed Chi to become my identity. Chi or die, right? I fell into the trap of thinking that that shirt would define me. And here's the truth. That shirt you wear is not your identity. Here's when it hit me. I was sitting in Convocation back there about my sophomore year, and the guy preaching that night was this old Chi guy. In fact, he confessed that he hid behind his burgundy coat because he was struggling with such deep insecurity and self-worth issues. Man, that stung me hard. I did not want to hear that, but I knew he was talking straight to me. I was trying to quench a deeper thirst with what was on my shirt. But this doesn't happen with just Greek clubs. That's my story. What's yours? Are you trying to fill your jar with being an athlete? God knows I struggle with that. What about being an SLC? Singers, campus choir, surely not something like Convergence, Crossover, Res Life. You see, the list never ends, and I wish I could tell you that the temptation ends, but it never does. Are you trying to fill your jar with what you wear? I've also tried to fill my jar with religion. I grew up in a really conservative Church of God congregation. We were right and we knew it. Here's what I thought. The Baptists got the grace thing wrong. The Methodists, the Presbyterians, the Episcopalians, the Lutherans, they all got the alcohol thing wrong. And the Catholics got everything wrong. Now, please understand, I don't believe that today, and I'm embarrassed to admit that that's what I grew up thinking. We even learned the old song, and some of y'all who were born and raised in this tradition, you've heard this song, "The Church of God is Right." Hallelujah to the lyrics of the song, I ain't going to sing it. The Church of God is right, hallelujah to the Lamb. The Church of God is right, hallelujah to the Lamb. The Church of God is right, hallelujah to the Lamb. Hallelujah to the Lamb. Somebody was really creative when they wrote that song, by the way. The implication of that song is that we were right, ... and everybody else was wrong. We always sought to have church, which meant that we would have some kind of super emotional experience. I thank God for those years. Please hear me. I thank God for those years. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to listen to all those Gaither DVDs. But here's the idea. I thank God for all those years, but there was something missing. I sure thought I loved God with all my emotions, but I didn't learn to love God with my entire self, especially my mind. I had a judgmental, emotions-based, immature faith that manifested itself in a Pharisaical posture. I finally came to a painful realization. I worshiped the way that I worshiped. I was so focused on being in love with Jesus that I forgot to love other people the way that Jesus did. I was trying to become like a Jesus that doesn't actually exist. I was so busy focusing on my needs that I didn't care about others the way that I should. Did all those spiritual experiences make me more like Jesus? Honestly, I treated God like a drug. It was supposed to make me feel better, but I walked around with so much hurt and bitterness toward other people, and oddly enough, to myself. In the midst of all these super spiritual experiences, what happened to true compassion for others? Did those emotional experiences even result in caring for others any better? And can I just say that I'm concerned for the church today? Do we worship, or do we worship God? Are you trying to fill your jar with religion? I've also tried to fill my jar with drugs and alcohol. I was introduced to alcohol when I was 13, introduced to drugs when I was 15. My early high school years were rough, and I thought self-medicating would satisfy my thirst. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where it wasn't a weekend if you didn't get stoned. I remember decorating my school for my sophomore year dance on one wintry Saturday afternoon. I'd just gotten my high school Letterman jacket. Talk about being identified by what you wear. Man, I was proud. Letterman jackets used to be a big thing. My friend, who happened to be the pastor's son, had stolen 2 bottles of vodka from the local liquor store. He kept one, he gave me the other. I snuck it into the school. I took a few swigs before putting the bottle in my locker. I'd slip down to the locker every so often to take a few more shots, and after a few trips to the locker, I was buzzed. A group of my friends decided that they wanted to go to a grocery store nearby, and the quickest way to get to the grocery store was to cut through our county fairgrounds. Now, it was bitterly cold that day, and there were a number of frozen puddles on the ground at that fairgrounds. And some horses were kept there throughout the year. Drunk, I decided I was going to go ice skating on some of those puddles. As I slid across that puddle like a fool, I fell in my new Letterman jacket. I kept sliding to the end of that puddle until I stopped at the end of that ice, and at the end of the ice, I am not lying, I slid into a huge pile of horse manure. I got my wake-up call that day. was drinking like that going to fill my deep thirst? My brother and I loved the Miami Dolphins when we were young kids, and that Dolphins team is the only NFL team to go undefeated for an entire season all the way through the Super Bowl. Our favorite player was this electric running back. His name was Eugene Mercury Morris, and he got the nickname Mercury because he was so quick. During my freshman year in high school, when I was struggling a great deal, Mercury, he was arrested for drug trafficking and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. I read about his mistakes. It didn't faze me. But after he got out of prison years later, he talked freely about his mistakes, and I was a bit more receptive to what he had to say at the time, and it shed some light on all the struggles that I had when I was a younger guy. I remember watching this interview with Mercury Morris one day, years after the fairgrounds incident, and he said something that resonated with me deeply. Mercury said that the term drug abuse is incorrect. He explained himself this way: in child abuse, the child suffers. In wife abuse, the wife suffers. In dog abuse, the dog suffers. But a drug is not an abusable item. You can't abuse it. The drug never suffers. You suffer. You abuse yourself. It's self-abuse, not drug abuse. The drug is not the problem. It's only a problem when you choose to use it. Are you trying to fill your jar with substances? I tried to fill my jar with pornography. Got to confess, I'm just like the woman at the well, looking for love in all the wrong places. Now, before I get into this any further, I want to make sure that we all can admit, as an honest community, that this ain't just a guy issue. But regardless, here's how we think. We shouldn't worry about porn use because it doesn't hurt anybody, right? My struggles during my college days involved trying to get my hands on porn magazines. And when I think about your generation, my heart breaks for you. Because it's so much easier to get. It's a click away. It's a couple keystrokes away. Either way, it's the same prison. Many of us struggle in such deep secrecy and shame. We feel isolated by it. We feel hopeless and helpless because we've tried to quit what feels like 1,000,000 times, and we keep coming back to the same prison. A few years ago, I read a letter that C.S. Lewis wrote in response to a man's letter to him about his struggles in this area. C.S. Lewis talks about how porn leads us to take an appetite that should lead us out of ourselves and turns us back into, catch his language, a prison of ourselves. He even talks about how as men, we create what he calls a harem, a big group of imaginary brides. And here's how he explains himself. The harem is always accessible, always subservient, calls for no sacrifices or adjustments, and can be endowed with erotic and psychological attractions which no real women can rival. Among those shadowy brides, he is always adored, always the perfect lover. No demand is made on his unselfishness. No mortification ever imposed on his vanity. In the end, they become merely the medium through which he increasingly adores himself. I have been trapped in that prison, but I can offer you hope tonight that with God's help and the help with people around you, you can get out. It's not easy. Sometimes it feels like 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. But there is hope tonight. Are you trying to fill your jar with porn? Finally, I've tried to fill my jar with food. And more food, and more food, and more food. Better ingredients, better pizza, right? Eat more chicken. Gladly. I'm loving it. In fact, I love it too much. And when life really starts to get you down, just live moss. It's amazing how many ways I could rationalize this. I'm just big boned. It's all because of genetics. We didn't have a lot of food when I was a kid. I work hard and I deserve to indulge. This is a source of comfort and satisfaction when things get crazy. I wouldn't be like this if I didn't have to deal with all the pain in my past. At least this food is something I can control. Maybe, just maybe, I can eat the pain away. I'll fix it later. If they don't accept me for who I am, forget them anyway. I was caught in a trap of my own making. Honestly, there's nothing quite like fat shaming yourself. Of course, there's nothing wrong with food, just like there's nothing wrong with the water that the woman at the well went to get that day to put in her jar. But just like she had to address a deeper thirst, I had to address a deeper hunger. If you can abuse yourself with drugs and alcohol, surely you can abuse yourself with food. This has been a lifelong struggle for me, and it will never stop. But I have to keep focusing on the deeper hunger instead of the momentary desires. Are you trying to fill your jar with food? Now, some of y'all can relate with the issues that I struggle with, but there is a host, there is a multitude, there is a rash of things that we keep trying to fill our jar with that really won't meet the deeper thirst. What about relationships that define us in unhealthy ways? Relationships in which we know we've compromised ourselves. Relationships that we've allowed to become more important to us than our relationships with Christ. What about teetering on the verge of addiction with entertainment like video games and Netflix? What about social media? Do you use social media, or does social media use you? What about trying to quench a deeper thirst with cutting? Some of us are addicted to apathy. Ironically, we say we don't care about anything, but we actually care deeply about not caring. And some of us, man, we care deeply about making sure others know we don't care. Some of us find meaning in being the hipster. We take pride in not conforming. But it's crazy, our identities are essentially defined by what we won't conform to. And how many of us at a Christian college think that our value is equated with our GPA? There are countless ways in which we try to fill our jars that won't meet the deeper thirst. The point is that the struggle is real for all of us. So I ask again, what do we keep putting in our jars that might quench our thirst for a moment, but doesn't satisfy what we really thirst for? We keep coming back to the same wells when life with Christ and in the kingdom can meet our needs so much more deeply. I got to be honest, I wish I could promise you a supernatural, instantaneous, complete transformation tonight, but this kind of transformation has to play out in our daily lives. In fact, we don't ever talk about the reality for the woman at the well after the story. Think about it this way. After this life-changing encounter with Jesus, after she drinks the living water, she still had to go back home and have some difficult conversations with that dude she was shacking up with. And we all know that temptation will come knocking on our doors as soon as any kind of experience we have is over. But I have to believe that tonight can make a difference. Just like that encounter with Jesus made a difference in the life of the woman at the well. You don't have to live in isolation anymore. You don't have to keep coming back to the same wells with that same jar anymore. Jesus wouldn't let the woman hide behind all of her stuff, and he cares too much about you to let you do the same. Why do we keep trying to hide anyway? He sees right through it. What's amazing is he still reaches out to offer us this living water, even though we don't deserve it. And think about how this story wraps up. Pastor Jason mentioned this last night. This woman, after she experienced this living water, she goes back to her community. She goes back to the same people that she is ashamed to be around, and she goes back and says, I think I've met the guy who can solve our water problem. I think I've met the guy who's the one that we've been talking about all this time. I think I've met the guy that can help us fill our lives. And because of her testimony, it's many people in the town developed a relationship with Jesus. Here's the message. Jesus doesn't want to fill your jar. He wants to fill you. And when he fills you, he wants that living water to give life to everyone around you in spite of your stuff. Aren't you thirsty for something more? Aren't you thirsty for something more? Aren't you thirsty for something more? I've asked Jenna Transky to come up and sing for us. And it's going to be a time that I'm going to ask you to just kind of chill. Let's take this time to sit and reflect and reflect on what God is trying to say to us. Let's prayerfully reflect as Jenna sings Once and For All.
God, I give you what I can today. You scattered ashes that are hid away. I lay it all at your feet. From the corners of my deepest shame, the empty places where I've worn your name, show me the love. I say I believe. Oh Lord, I lay it down. Help me to lay it down. Oh the crimson flowing from the cross. Pour over me. Pour over me. Yeah. Oh, let this be where I die, my Lord, with thee crucified, and be lifted high as my kingdoms fall once and for all, once and for all. Oh Lord, I lay it down. Oh Lord, I lay it down. Help me to lay it down. Oh Lord, I lay it down. Oh, let this be where I die, and my Lord with thee crucified, and be lifted high as my kingdoms fall once and for all, once and for all, once and for all, once and for all.
As Alex said at the beginning of the service, we've kind of changed up the sequence a little bit tonight on purpose, because with a message like this, it'd be kind of cruel and unusual to just kind of say the college benediction and send you home. We want to give you time to respond. I don't know if you can identify with my stuff, but I do know that each of us struggles deeply with what we keep trying to put in this thing that's temporary and ultimately not very satisfying. Even things that are good, even things that are wonderful, but we get things prioritized in the right way. So here's how we're going to handle these next 3 songs. The band's got 3 songs ready for us, and we're going to worship. But during this worship time, you could feel free to sit where you are. You can stand where you are. If you want to come down to the altar, come down to the altar. Listen, if there's somebody in the crowd that you need to make things right with tonight, there's no better time. What more should an altar call be for? Maybe there's somebody home that you need to text. Maybe you need to make something right, or maybe you just need to maybe go sit and talk with some friends about this thing that you keep struggling with. But regardless of how you do it, let's experience this living water together. Let's worship.